I'm James Loftus with JPL Museum.org. And this is my first time giving a virtual tour for a grant, so please bear with me. I'd like to introduce Paul Ruggles. He's a volunteer for our museum. He's been here 7 years. Paul, can you tell me why you volunteer?
Well, my name is Paul Ruggles. I'm from Silverton, Oregon. James here is my good friend. And my job here at the museum, my volunteer job is to write grants, raise money, and do social media outreach. But most importantly, my inspiration for volunteering here comes from seeing these kids as we go into the schools light up and be inspired by the artifacts they get a hold in their hands as we tour the state and their schools.
Thank you, Paul. So we're going to start this tour. It's going to be a little rough. I've never done this before, but I'd like to introduce my father. This is my father here, Joe Loftus Jr., and my father and this nurse, Lois Hammer, wrote the manual on man's environment and weightlessness. And in this photograph, they are training John Glenn, Wally Schirra, Buzz Aldrin, Deke Slayton, Gus Grissom, and Scott Carpenter. They're standing outside the aircraft affectionately referred to as the Vomit Comet. Here's my father pointing at the flight path. So think of it as like being in a roller coaster with no seatbelt, and as you come over that parabolic arc, you're in free fall with the aircraft until they pull up, hence the term Vomit Comet. The scarf on the wall is called a photochromatograph. It's a laser-thin slice of a lunar fragment that's been magnified and then transferred onto a silk screen. So what you're looking at are the crystalline structure and the minerals trapped in the rock at the time of its formation. They believe this particular sample was a colloidal impact rock, meaning something very large struck the moon, drove itself into the core of the moon, was ejected into space, eventually fell back to the lunar surface, and in 1971, during Apollo 15, we picked it up and brought it back to Earth. This is a condensed version of our tour, but I wanted to point out some artifacts that I'm able to put into children's hands. This is a plug out of the Apollo 11 command module heat shield. This is a Skylab heat shield. And I actually let children hold that so they can actually see something that was flown in space. And they can also appreciate the fact that the charred part on it was created by nothing more than friction from air molecules, because these pieces were coming into the atmosphere at over 20,000 miles an hour. The other artifact that I let them hold is an RD-4100 rocket engine. It's part of the Apollo spacecraft's attitude control. Personally, I think everyone should have an attitude control engine, but if you look here on this model, you can see a cluster of 4 engines on each corner of the ascent stage. That's one of those engines, so they get to actually hold a piece of spacecraft in their hand. Over here is a pair of lunar excursion overboots. This is the 12th and final layer the astronaut would put on prior to exiting the spacecraft. A lot of people don't realize that when you step into the vacuum of space, that when you're facing the sun, it's like being in an oven at 275 degrees, while your backside's in a freezer at minus 275 degrees. So these spacesuits are mini spaceships, and it allows them to be in a very harsh environment. I would like to tell you the story of Phil. Phil is number 174 of the Project Mercury space chimps, and he came into our possession. He retired to Mahama, Oregon, has been sitting on a bookshelf until he came into the museum. And through our research, we were able to reach out and we were able to find the gentleman in the photograph on the side of his case. His name's Bill Britz. Bill was kind enough to send in his journal. So I go through his journal and I come to 174, and it has country of origin, his birth date, his name Phil, and then next to his name in big bold letters, and it's circled, is GE. So I get all excited thinking General Electric. They were a prime contractor for NASA. So I get a hold of Bill and I tell him, "Hey, Bill, I found Phil." And he goes, "Whoa, James, slow down. How do you know it's him?" And I said, "Well, the bag said 174 on it and your journal says that's Phil." He goes, "Well, James, I hate to disappoint you, but that could be a lot number or shelf location number. Where the heck did you get it from?" And I said, "Oh, I made friends with this gentleman, David Prine. He came in and donated it to the museum." Bill's response is, "Well, your provenance is good. I knew his father, Colonel James Prine. He was chief veterinarian pathologist at Holloman Air Force Base. I'm just not convinced." And I said, "Well, Bill, I didn't want to have to admit this, but I accidentally dropped Phil, and when I was putting his jaw back on, I flipped his skull over and noticed somebody had etched Phil, 174, into the top plate of his mouth." And Bill goes, "Well, that's pretty conclusive evidence if you ask me." And I go, yes, sir. Can you tell me what this GE is?" And the phone goes dead. And I'm like, Bill, are you there? Bill? And just as I'm about to hang up, I hear, "James, I'm 93 years old, and that stands for the Great Escape." And I said, well, you got to tell me this story, please. And he goes, no, I need to tell you about Colonel James Cook. I was 19. No, I was maybe 20. It doesn't matter. I love my job. These chimps were like my babies. And we got a new commanding officer of the consortium. Colonel James Cook comes in and calls all his handlers together and gives us a standing order that anytime the alpha males are put through an extreme stress test, we had 10 minutes to notify them. The funny thing is, he'd go into the cage, he'd bring a banana, a Coke, a cigar, and a piece of chalk. And he'd give it to the chimp in that order. Give him the banana, give him the Coke, he'd light the cigar, give him the cigar, and then he'd sit down and play tic-tac-toe. And he'd intentionally lose, and that chimp would get up and beat his chest, parade around smoking his cigar, sit down and sign play again. James, he'd do this for 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time. We thought he was crazy. It was about a year later, it was my day off, and the air raid siren went off, and I ignored it. A few minutes later, the colonel rushed in and said, Bill, grab your leashes, we've had an escape. Well, James, I was thinking like one or two, but as I go out to get in the back of the long bedded Jeep, it was pure pandemonium. Imagine 250 air patrolmen chasing 19 African chimps across the New Mexican desert. And then he paused and he said, James, those chimps, they can cover 50, 75 feet in a matter of seconds, and they're strong enough to remove any of your appendages, forget about their teeth. Well, anyways, the colonel and I got in the Jeep, we did this flanking maneuver, got out in front, and then all of a sudden the colonel pulled over, turned off the engine, lit his cigar, and put his feet up on the dash. Bill's in the back of the Jeep squirming in his seat going, what are we doing? Why have we stopped? Where are my babies? James, I swear it was less than a minute. Those chimps must have smelled that cigar smoke, and they come rushing over to the top of that sand dune. The colonel jumped up, popped open a Coke, and they stopped dead in their tracks. Bill got out of the Jeep. They rushed to get into the Jeep, sat down, crossed their legs, raised their hands up for a cigar. The colonel lit them up. Bill put leashes on their neck, and they drove right back to the cages. The next day, the colonel authorized Jerry Finnig and Bill Britz to put in a 30-foot wide, 10-foot deep, concrete line, double electric fence moat system. And if you'd like to see a picture of them, Bill was kind enough to scan in over 600 megabytes of photos that had never seen the light of day until we published them on our website.
On behalf of our team, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to the Pacific Corps Foundation for their generous support of JPL Museum's projects. Your commitment to fostering education and innovation has made a profound difference in our ability to bring this vision to life. Without your partnership, we would not have been able to accomplish all that we have, from preserving vital history and curating exhibits to ensuring that JPL Museum inspires generations with the legacy of exploration and discovery. Your belief in our mission has been more than financial assistance. It has been a vote of confidence that keeps us striving to honor the past and the future of space exploration. Thank you again.